I always thought my family was an open book, but during my 21st birthday dinner, my Uncle Marcus handed out 5 small plastic-wrapped boxes that turned our perfect history into a lie. My father didn't just look surprised. He looked like he'd seen his own ghost. The silverware clinked against the fine china, a sound that usually felt like home, but tonight it felt like a countdown. My name is Lily Rose, and up until 3 months ago, I believed my greatest struggle was deciding on a career path after graduation. We were sitting in the dining room, the one with the heavy oak table and the portraits of ancestors who all shared the same high cheekbones and dark eyes. Or so I thought. My father, David, sat at the head, radiating his usual calm authority. My mother, Elena, was glowing, her hand resting gently on his arm. Then Uncle Marcus stood up. Marcus was always the wild card. He traveled the world, chasing DNA lineages and dusty archives. He tapped his wine glass, the ringing sound cutting through our laughter. "I've spent a lot of money on this family's legacy," he said, a mischievous glint in his eyes. "But why guess when we can know? I bought us all the premium DNA kits, every single one of us." He started sliding the kits across the table. One for me, one for my brother, one for my mother. When he pushed the last one toward my father, the room went silent. My father didn't reach for it. He didn't even blink. I watched the color drain from his face, starting at his forehead and rushing down to his throat. His hand, usually steady as a rock, began to tremble against the white tablecloth. He looked at that little cardboard box as if it were a live grenade. "David?" my mother whispered, her smile faltering. "It's just a fun test. See where the Rose bloodline actually comes from." "I don't need a test to know who I am," my father snapped. His voice was brittle, a sharp contrast to the warm jazz playing in the background. "Oh, come on, Dave," Marcus laughed, oblivious to the tension. "Unless you're worried about finding a secret cousin or a hidden branch in the woods." The rest of the family clapped, cheering for the fun project. I clapped too, but my eyes never left my father. He looked trapped. He looked terrified. It was the first time in my life I realized that the man who raised me was keeping a secret that was about to scream. I took my kid up to my room that night. I stared at the sterile cotton swab. I thought about my father's pale face. Something deep in my gut told me that if I swiped this across my cheek, the Lily Rose I knew would disappear forever. But curiosity is a cruel thing. I did it. I sealed the tube, mailed it, and waited. 3 weeks later, an email notification popped up on my phone while I was sitting in a quiet library. "Your results are ready." I clicked it. My heart was hammering against my ribs so hard I thought it might bruise. I scrolled past the ethnicity estimates, the French, the Irish, the Mediterranean. I went straight to the DNA matches section. I expected to see my father's name at the top. I expected to see David Rose, father. Instead, the top match was a name I had never heard in my life, a man named Thomas Thorne. And the percentage of shared DNA next to his name wasn't just a distant cousin. It was 49.9%. I wasn't a Rose. Everything I knew about my blood was a lie. The screen of my phone felt hot against my palm. I sat there, surrounded by the smell of old books and the muffled sound of students whispering, but the world had gone completely silent. Thomas Thorne. The name sounded like a villain from a Gothic novel. It didn't sound like Dad. I refreshed the page, hoping for a glitch, a digital error that would put the world back on its axis. But the numbers didn't move. 49.9%. In the world of genetics, that number is a definitive sentence. It means parent. I looked at the photos of my childhood saved on my phone. Me on my father's shoulders at the county fair. Him, teaching me how to drive in the old sedan. I searched his face for my features. We both had the same jawline. Or did we? Or was I just seeing what I had been told to see for 21 years? I didn't go home immediately. I couldn't. I spent 4 hours in a coffee shop, my fingers flying over the keyboard, searching for any trace of Thomas Thorne. I found him on a professional networking site. He was a retired landscape architect, living 3 states away. He had silver hair and a kind, slightly tired smile. And then I saw it. In his profile picture, he was holding a mug. The way his pinky finger curled slightly outward, the exact same weird habit I had. My breath hitched. It was a tiny, insignificant detail that felt like a scream. I drove home in a trance. When I walked through the front door, the house felt like a museum of a life I no longer owned. My mother was in the kitchen, humming as she chopped vegetables for a salad. She looked so peaceful, so innocent. "Mom," I said, my voice sounding like it belonged to someone else. She turned around, her smile bright. "Lily, you're just in time for—" She stopped. She saw my face. She saw the way I was clutching my phone. The color didn't just leave her face, it collapsed. She knew. Before I even opened my mouth, the guilt of 2 decades rose to the surface of her eyes. "I got the results," I whispered. "Who is Thomas Thorne?" The knife she was holding hit the wooden cutting board with a dull thud. She didn't deny it. She didn't ask who Thomas was. She simply leaned against the counter, her shoulders sagging as if a literal weight had been dropped on them. "Your father, David. He doesn't know," she breathed. "David is my father," I snapped, the tears finally burning my eyes. "But he's not my dad? Is that what you're telling me?" "Marcus gave us those kits as a joke, Mom. He thought it would be fun. And now I find out my entire life is a scripted performance." "It wasn't a performance," she pleaded, moving toward me. "I loved him. I love him. But back then, before you were born, things were complicated. David and I had broken up for 3 months. I met Thomas. It was brief. When David and I got back together, I found out I was pregnant. I chose the life I wanted, Lily. I chose the man I wanted to be your father." "You didn't choose," I said, stepping back from her touch. "You lied. You let him raise a child that wasn't his. You let me grow up believing I belong to a history that isn't mine. Lily, please. If he finds out, it will kill him. You saw his face at dinner. He suspects. He's always suspected deep down, but he never wanted to know for sure. He chose to be your father every single day." I looked at her, and for the first time she looked like a stranger to me. I thought about the man upstairs, the man who stopped smiling the moment those DNA kits touched the table. He wasn't just hiding from the truth, he was hiding from the destruction of his identity. "I'm going to find him," I said. "Who, Thomas?" My mother's voice rose in panic. "No," I replied, heading for the stairs. "I'm going to talk to the man who raised me, and I'm going to see if he's ready to stop pretending." But as I reached the landing, I saw my father's office door was cracked open. The light was off, but I could hear a sound I had never heard in my entire life. My father was sobbing. The sound was hollow, like air being forced out of a collapsing lung. My father was a man of iron. He was the one who fixed the roof in the middle of a storm and stayed calm when the bills piled up. Hearing him break down in the dark felt like watching a mountain crumble. I pushed the door open slowly. The only light in the room came from his computer screen, casting a cold blue glow over his face. On the desk sat the DNA kit Marcus had given him. It was open. The seal on the tube was broken. He didn't even look up when I walked in. He just stared at the wall, his eyes red and unfocused. "You knew," I whispered. It wasn't a question anymore. He wiped his face with a trembling hand and finally looked at me. "I didn't know, Lily. I chose not to see. There's a difference." He stood up, his legs looking heavy, and walked over to the window. "When your mother and I got back together, I was so happy I didn't care about the timeline. I didn't care about the math. Then you were born, and you had those eyes that didn't belong to anyone in my family. I told myself it was a recessive gene. I told myself 1,000 lies every morning just so I could hold you." "Why didn't you say anything at dinner?" I asked, my voice cracking. "When Uncle Marcus handed those out, you looked like you were dying." "Because Marcus is a rose," he said bitterly. "He's obsessed with pure bloodlines. If he found out his niece wasn't one of us, he'd never let your mother hear the end of it. He'd tear this family apart just to prove he was right." "I wasn't protecting myself, Lily. I was protecting you from feeling like an outsider in your own home." The anger I felt toward my mother began to shift into a heavy, suffocating pity for the man standing in front of me. He had spent 21 years living in a house of cards, terrified that one breeze, one curious uncle would blow it all down. "I found him," I said quietly. My father stiffened. "Thomas?" "Yeah, he lives in Vermont. He's a landscape architect. My father turned back to me, and for a second I saw a flash of something that looked like heartbreak mixed with curiosity. "Does he look like you?" he asked. "He has my hands," I admitted. "And the way he holds his coffee, it's exactly like me." The silence that followed was the loudest thing I'd ever heard. My father sat back down in his chair, looking smaller than I'd ever seen him. He looked at the family photos on his desk, the Lily Combe stories I used to tell him when I was little, the graduation pictures, the holidays. "Are you going to go to him?" he asked. His voice was so thin, I could barely hear it. "I don't know," I said, "but I do know one thing. He might be the reason I exist, but you're the reason I'm Lily Rose." He reached out and took my hand. His grip was weak, but he didn't let go. For a moment it felt like we were okay. But then, the front door slammed downstairs. "David! Lily!" It was Uncle Marcus. He sounded excited, too excited. "The lab sent me an alert. Since I bought the family pack, I can see when the results are uploaded. We need to talk about the Rose heritage right now." My father and I froze. The secret wasn't just in the room anymore. It was downstairs, and it had a loud mouth. Uncle Marcus didn't wait for an invitation. We heard his heavy footsteps pounding up the stairs, each one sounding like a drum beat in a horror movie. My father's grip on my hand tightened for a split second before he let go, his face hardening into a mask of pure survival. "David? Lily? Are you in there?" Marcus swung the door open, his iPad held out like a weapon. He was grinning, but it was that sharp, predatory grin he got when he'd uncovered a piece of gossip or a truth no one else had seen. "Marcus, it's late," my father said, his voice dropping into a low, dangerous growl. "Get out of my office." "Oh, stop being so dramatic, Dave," Marcus laughed, stepping into the room and flicking on the overhead light. The sudden brightness was blinding. "I was just checking the dashboard for the kits I bought. It's fascinating stuff. But I noticed something odd, a glitch maybe." He walked right up to the desk, sliding his iPad onto the mahogany surface between us. "See, I've got the whole tree mapped out. Here's me, here's you, here's our parents. But when I looked at Lily's preliminary match alerts, your name isn't on the list, Dave. In fact, her DNA is showing a 0% match to the Rose lineage. 0. The silence that followed was absolute. I could hear the hum of the computer fan and the distant sound of my mother sobbing in the kitchen downstairs. She knew the explosion was coming. "It's a mistake," I said, my voice surprisingly steady. "The kits are cheap, Marcus. Everyone knows they aren't 100% accurate." "Not this inaccurate, kiddo," Marcus said, his eyes darting between me and my father. The fun uncle was gone. In his place was a man obsessed with a family legacy that he treated like a religion. "I spent $5,000 on these high-end genomic sequences. They don't miss a father-daughter connection. So, David, what's going on? Is there something you forgot to tell the family about Elena's trip 22 years ago?" My father stood up. He didn't look like a broken man anymore. He looked like a man who had nothing left to lose. He walked around the desk until he was inches away from Marcus's face. "You think this is a game? You think you're a detective because you bought some spit tubes from a laboratory? I think the Rose family name means something," Marcus spat back. "And if she isn't a Rose, she doesn't belong on that tree. She doesn't belong in this house's history." "She is my daughter," my father said, each word hitting like a hammer. "In every way that matters, she is mine. If you say one more word about her blood, or my wife, I will forget that we share the same name." "You're choosing a lie over your own flesh and blood?" Marcus looked disgusted. He picked up his iPad. "Fine, but the rest of the family is going to find out. I've already shared the unlinked status to the family group portal. Everyone's getting the notification right about now." My phone buzzed in my pocket. Then my father's phone chimed on the desk. Downstairs, I heard my mother let out a strangled cry. The secret wasn't a secret anymore. It was a digital broadcast. Marcus turned to leave, a smug look of justice on his face, but he stopped at the door. "By the way, Lily," he said, looking back at me with a cold pity, "the guy you are matched with, that Thomas Thorne guy, I looked him up. He's been looking for family for years. Maybe you should go find out why he was so easy to replace." He left, and the house fell into a terrifying, heavy quiet. My father didn't look at me. He just looked at his hands. as if he were checking to see if they were still there. "I have to go," I whispered. "Lily, wait," my father started, but I was already out the door. I grabbed my car keys and ran. I didn't have a plan. I didn't have a suitcase. All I had was a name, a city in Vermont, and a sudden desperate need to see the face of the man who had accidentally destroyed my world. The highway was a blur of gray asphalt and flashing white lines. I drove for 6 hours straight, the humming of the tires against the road acting as the only thing keeping me from falling apart. Every time I closed my eyes, I saw my father's face. Not David's, but the man from the internet, Thomas. I arrived in a small Vermont town just as the sun began to bleed over the horizon, turning the sky a bruised purple. It was the kind of place where everyone knew everyone, and the air smelled like pine and damp earth. Following the GPS coordinates I'd pulled from his public records, I pulled up to a modest, cedar-shingled house at the end of a long, winding driveway. The garden was beautiful, overflowing with wildflowers and neatly trimmed hedges, a landscape architect's touch for sure. I sat in the car for 20 minutes, my hands gripped so tightly on the steering wheel that my knuckles turned white. What was I doing here? Was I looking for a father, or was I just looking for a reason to hate my mother? Finally, the front door opened. A man stepped out, wearing a thick flannel shirt and carrying a steaming mug of coffee. He looked older than his profile picture. His hair was completely white now, but when he turned to look toward the driveway, my heart stopped. He didn't just have my habit of curling his pinky finger. He had my nose. He had the exact same way of tilting his head when he was curious. I got out of the car. My legs felt like lead. As I walked toward him, he squinted against the morning sun, setting his coffee down on the porch railing. "Can I help you?" he asked. His voice was deep, resonant, and oddly familiar. "My name is Lily Rose," I said, my voice trembling, "and I think you've been looking for me." Thomas Thorne didn't drop his mug. He didn't scream. He just stood there, his eyes scanning my face with a hunger that told me he had been waiting for this moment for 21 years. He sat down heavily on a porch chair, gesturing for me to do the same. "Elena's daughter," he whispered. "I always knew. I told her I didn't care about the breakup. I told her I wanted to be there. But she told me you weren't mine. She sent me a faked blood test a month after you were born to get me to stop calling." "She lied to you too?" I asked, a fresh wave of anger washing over me. "She wasn't trying to be cruel, Lily," Thomas said, looking out at his garden. "She was terrified. David Rose came from money, stability, and a perfect family. I was a struggling artist with nothing to my name but a bag of seeds and a dream. She thought she was giving you a better life by choosing him. She thought she was protecting you from my struggle." He looked at me, his eyes wet with unshed tears. "I've checked the DNA databases every week for 5 years, hoping you'd take a test. Not to steal you away, but just to know you existed." We talked for hours. He told me about the poems he wrote for my mother, the sketches he'd made of what he imagined I'd look like, and the life he'd built here in the quiet woods. He was a good man, a kind man, but as the afternoon sun began to set, my phone started blowing up with texts. It was a video from my brother. It was a recording of the family group chat. Uncle Marcus hadn't stopped at a notification. He was at my parents' house, and he was demanding that my father sign over his portion of the family inheritance, because he wasn't a true Rose father. My stomach turned. While I was here finding myself, the man who had actually stayed, the man who had changed my diapers and cheered at my graduations, was being stripped of everything he owned. I stood up. "I have to go back." Thomas nodded, standing with me. "To have raised you." "I'll come back," I promised, "but right now, I have to go save my dad." The drive back felt twice as long. My mind was a battlefield, clashing between the peaceful life of Thomas Thorne and the burning wreckage Marcus was making of my home. By the time I pulled into our driveway, the porch lights were flickering, and I could see shadows pacing behind the frosted glass of my father's office window. I didn't knock. I burst through the front door. The living room was a disaster of emotions. My mother was slumped in an armchair, her face buried in her hands. Marcus was standing in the center of the rug, a stack of legal-looking papers in his hand, his voice echoing off the high ceilings. "It's about integrity, David. Marcus shouted. The Rose estate was built on lineage. If you're going to harbor a lie, you don't get to benefit from the name. Sign the waiver, and we can all move on from this embarrassment. My father was sitting at the oak table, looking older than the wood itself. He held a pen, his hand hovering over the paper. He looked ready to give up, to pay the price for a secret he hadn't even started. Put the pen down, Dad, I said, my voice cutting through the room like a blade. Everyone froze. Marcus turned, his eyes narrowing. Ah, the runaway, back from your little discovery tour. I hope your new friend was worth the trip, because you've cost this family everything. I walked straight up to Marcus and snatched the papers out of his hand. I didn't look at them, I just ripped them down the middle. Then again, and again. You talk a lot about blood, Marcus, I said, stepping into his personal space, but you don't know the first thing about family. You think being a Rose is about a lab result? It's about who shows up. It's about who stays when things get ugly. You're an outsider now, Lily, Marcus sneered, trying to grab the torn scraps. You have no say in this. I have every say, I countered, because I'm the one who's going to tell the board of the family foundation exactly how you tried to blackmail a grieving man in the middle of a private crisis. I'm the one who's going to tell them that you violated medical privacy laws by accessing my data without consent. You want to talk about the law? Let's talk about the lawsuit I'll file against you personally for the digital harassment of my father. Marcus's face went from smug to ghostly pale. He hadn't expected me to fight back with the same cold precision he used. Get out, my father said. It wasn't a shout. It was a command. Marcus looked at my mother, then at me, and finally at the man he had called brother for 50 years. He realized the truth hadn't made him powerful. It had just made him lonely. He grabbed his coat and walked out, the door slamming behind him with a finality that felt like a funeral for our old lives. Silence settled over us. My mother finally looked up, her eyes red and pleading. Lily, David, I am so sorry. My father stood up and walked over to me. He didn't look at the torn papers. He just looked at me. Did you find what you were looking for? I found a man who looks like me, I said softly, reaching out to take his hand. But I realized that I already had a father. I don't need a DNA kit to tell me whose daughter I am. We aren't the perfect family anymore. The portraits on the wall don't look the same, and the dinner conversations are quieter, more careful. But they are honest. I still talk to Thomas. We're building a bridge, slowly. But every Sunday, I sit at that heavy oak table with David Rose. It's something you earn. Have you ever discovered a secret that changed how you looked at your own parents? If this story moved you, hit the subscribe button and join our community at Lily Calm Stories for more deep, human journeys.